Tonight, a major development is unfolding in Washington, and most of the mainstream media is barely covering it. The United States Senate has just adopted a resolution that, if it becomes law, would effectively overturn the powers that former President Donald Trump has used to impose tariffs. This is related to the AIPA, the authority Trump relied on to implement many of his unilateral trade measures. The resolution is significant because it is now being debated at the highest levels, potentially making its way to the Supreme Court. Congress, as the legislative branch, has the constitutional authority to assert its power over whether or not the president can continue to wield these economic tools. Today, the Senate put forward yet another resolution, marking the third such measure this week, aimed at rolling back Trump's tariff authority. Previously, the Senate considered one resolution focused specifically on Canada and another on Brazil. In each case, a small but meaningful number of Republicans joined Democrats to challenge Trump's unilateral powers. While this may appear to some as merely symbolic, it is far more consequential than it seems at first glance. Currently, the House of Representatives is not expected to take up the measure, which means Trump's tariffs will remain in place for the time being. However, the political implications of the Senate vote cannot be understated. This is about much more than tariffs. It is about Congress. It is about Congress asserting itself over the executive branch and setting limits on the president's unilateral authority. Hello, everyone. Carl is here. Today, what I want to share may be the most critical political moment Donald Trump has faced since entering the Oval Office. This is not impeachment. This is something far subtler, far more consequential, and potentially far more damaging in the long term. For years, Trump relied on tariffs as a core element of his economic strategy. His use of tariffs against Canada, for example, represents a costly tax increase for American families, a direct impact that most citizens feel in their day-to-day lives. If the president had legitimate concerns about trade relations with Canada, the proper route would have been negotiation through existing trade agreements. After all, Trump successfully negotiated the USMCA, a landmark trade deal, which garnered 89 bipartisan votes in Congress. That was negotiation, not unilateral action. Tariffs are dramatic, headline-grabbing tools, and Trump has always preferred spectacle over process. But now, Congress is saying no. The Senate vote to strip Trump of his tariff authority passed with a veto-proof supermajority, 68 senators in favor, 29 opposed. That means even if Trump attempted to veto the resolution, Congress has the numbers to override him, rendering his veto pen effectively useless. Among the 68 votes, 22 Republicans crossed the aisle to join Democrats. Let that number sink in. 22 Republican senators looked their own party's president in the eye and said, "We are taking your toys away." This vote is not about removing Trump from office. It is about removing his tools. A president without tools is a figurehead. He may occupy the Oval Office and sit behind a grand desk, but without power, he can do little to implement his policies. Tariffs have always been Trump's preferred economic weapon. He loves them. He uses them strategically to bully other countries, reward loyalists, and energize his political base by presenting himself as the protector of American workers. For years, Congress allowed him nearly unchecked authority to implement tariffs on China, Canada, Europe, and other trade partners. Republican lawmakers often grumbled in carefully worded statements expressing concern on cable news and in press releases. But when votes arrived, they consistently fell in line, until now. In late January 2026, the Senate finally drew a line. With a 68-29 vote, they stripped Trump of his unilateral authority over tariffs. 22 Republicans were willing to defy their own president, and that defiance sends a clear message. Loyalty to the man no longer outweighs loyalty to constituents or the broader economy. The reasons for this rebellion are clear. Trump's tariff wars have had tangible consequences for ordinary Americans. Farmers watched overseas markets dry up as retaliatory tariffs hit U.S. exports. Small businesses suffered from rising costs and disrupted supply chains. Consumers paid more for everything from groceries to cars. Republican senators in swing states received daily feedback from constituents who were facing the consequences of Trump's economic policies. Polls reflected growing frustration and dissatisfaction. When faced with the choice between loyalty to Trump and political survival, 22 Republican senators chose survival. That decision makes perfect sense. Elected officials are accountable to the people who vote for them. And when those constituents are hurting economically, political calculations change. The tariff rebellion was not the only sign of growing resistance within the Senate. Around the same time, lawmakers advanced a war powers resolution aimed at limiting Trump's ability to engage militarily in Venezuela. While that resolution ultimately stalled procedurally, the willingness of Republican senators to support it sent a message louder than any headline. Congress is no longer intimidated. Senators were willing to challenge the president directly, publicly, and without fear of immediate political repercussions. The White House received the message clearly. The days of unchecked presidential authority are over. Trump, true to form, responded with threats. According to NBC News, he personally called Republican senators who had voted for the War Powers resolution. He warned them of primary challenges, accused them of betraying the country, and attempted to intimidate them into compliance. However, this time his tactics failed. Senators voted according to their calculations about political risk rather than out of fear of the president. Once a senator defies Trump and survives, the threat factor evaporates. Intimidation loses its power, and other members of Congress begin to feel emboldened. The precedent has been set. Defying the president is no longer political suicide. This shift has profound implications for governance. 22 Republican senators broke with the president on tariffs, and others have demonstrated a willingness to challenge him on war powers. That sets the stage for a broader erosion of unilateral presidential authority. When budget negotiations arrive, when major legislation is on the table, when Supreme Court nominations demand approval, Congress may act independently rather than defer to the president's preferences. The dam has cracked. Once that happens, the scope of congressional oversight is fundamentally altered. By February 11, 2026, the House of Representatives joined the fight. They passed legislation rolling back Trump's tariffs on Canada, signaling that both chambers of Congress are now willing to work with Democrats to undo policies enacted by the president. Commentators are calling this the most significant Republican rebellion against Trump since his impeachment. Yet the context differs. During impeachment, the rebellion focused on a single scandal. Now, the challenge is structural. Congress is targeting core presidential tools, tariff authority, war powers, veto power. These are the mechanisms that give the presidency its functional weight, and Congress is dismantling them systematically. The irony is striking. Republican senators had two chances to remove Trump from office through impeachment, and both times they refused. Trump survived, and his base rallied around him, energized by the perception of persecution. Now those same senators are enacting what may be even more significant consequences. Rather than creating a martyr, they are systematically stripping him of the ability to wield power. They are effectively rendering him irrelevant. For a man whose identity is intertwined with control and dominance, this may be the most damaging outcome of all. This is not merely a fight over tariffs or military action. It is about the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches, the very structure designed to prevent any one person from dominating the American government. For decades, presidents have expanded executive authority through orders, emergency declarations, and unilateral trade measures, often with Congress turning a blind eye. These recent votes indicate that Congress is reclaiming its constitutional responsibility to check the executive, whether one supports Trump or opposes him. This is how the system is intended to function. 3 branches of government, checks and balances, accountability. The political math for Republican senators has changed. Previously, standing against Trump was seen as political suicide. His base was loyal, and his endorsement carried enormous influence. Now the calculus has shifted. Voters prioritize their financial well-being over loyalty to a single politician. Rise in costs, retaliatory trade measures, disrupted supply chains, and declining small business revenues have forced senators to act in defense of their constituents. Senators crossing Trump are responding to reality, not courage. They are reading the room and acting accordingly. Trump's traditional levers of control, threats, intimidation, fear, loyalty, are losing their power. Senators who once trembled at his disapproval now survive openly defying him. Their survival is not just personal. It sets a model for others, showing that resistance carries fewer risks than before. This is more than a political quirk. It's a seismic shift in Washington. Trump is moving from the role of an unassailable force to a leader whose authority can be constrained, both legally and politically. This is not about a sudden impeachment or a scandal splashing across headlines. It's a slow, methodical erosion of influence, happening through the very constitutional processes designed to check presidential power. When Congress acts, limiting tariffs, curbing war powers, asserting veto overrides, it chips away at the tools that make the presidency powerful. The office itself remains, the occupant remains, but the levers that turn decisions into action are being removed. Trump is left in the Oval Office with the keys to a car, but no engine. He sits in the driver's seat, but the vehicle goes nowhere. What's crucial is that these precedents are not just about Trump. Every authority that Congress reclaims now sets a limit for all future presidents, whether Democrat or Republican. The presidency is not meant to accumulate unchecked power, and this moment represents a historic correction in the balance of power. This is not dramatic theater. It's structural change. Power does not vanish overnight, but the norms and mechanisms that enabled unchecked influence are being reshaped. Washington's elite and the public watching from the sidelines are witnessing a transition from personality-driven authority to institutional control. In practical terms, Trump's influence over legislation appointments and international negotiations is now fragile. Threats that once silenced dissenters now bounce off hardened political resolve. Loyalty is no longer automatic. Fear is diluted. The machinery of control, the things that once made him feel untouchable, is slowly dismantled, piece by piece. This moment has lasting significance. The erosion of Trump's informal power demonstrates that even the most dominant political figure can be constrained by routine constitutional checks and balances. The presidency may appear strong, but its functional authority is under recalibration, and the shift is permanent. The slow drain of power underscores a core principle. Authority is not granted by charisma alone. It exists within a framework of laws, institutions, and accountability. Trump may sit in the Oval Office, but the office itself now defines the limits of his reach. This is more than politics. It's a historic recalibration of how American democracy operates in real time, reinforcing the mechanisms designed to prevent the concentration of power in any one individual. The unfolding rebellion demonstrates that the American system of government remains resilient. Congress is asserting its constitutional authority, checking presidential power, and protecting the interests of citizens. A president who once seemed untouchable is discovering that he is not invincible. A political party that was unified behind a single figure is fracturing, signaling long-term implications for governance, policy, and electoral dynamics. Where does this go from here? The precise outcome is still uncertain, but the signals are unmistakable. The rebellion within the Republican Party is growing, and the numbers exist to directly challenge Trump's authority. His grip on the party is weaker now than at any point since he first took office. If the House continues rolling back tariffs, if the Senate maintains strict oversight on war powers, and if more Republicans openly defy the presidency itself could face serious constraints in the coming months. This isn't chaos. It's a constitutional, methodical process of limiting executive power, unfolding in real time. 22 Republican senators have already made it clear to Trump his power has limits. Their defiance is not symbolic. It is concrete, measurable, and sets a precedent for others to follow. Each vote, each legislative action, each committee hearing chips away at the notion that the presidency can operate unchecked. The broader implications are profound. Policy decisions will now face greater scrutiny. Executive overreach will encounter institutional resistance, and governance will be reshaped by a new balance of power. The precedents set now will not vanish when Trump leaves office. They will define the boundaries of presidential authority for future administrations, Republican or Democrat. This is a historic moment, not a fleeting one. What's happening isn't the result of scandal or personal animus. It's a systematic reinforcement of constitutional limits, a demonstration that even a dominant polarizing figure cannot escape the rules and structures that define American democracy. For Trump, the challenge is immediate. His ability to push through unilateral decisions, influence trade, or assert military authority is directly constrained by legislative and political realities. The tools that once amplified his power, fear, loyalty, intimidation, are now far less effective. For the country, this is a reminder that the founding framework of checks and balances is still functional. Power is not absolute, and even the most forceful leader can be held accountable through normal, legal, and constitutional channels. What unfolds next will depend on whether these legislative actions continue and whether party members persist in asserting their independence. But the trajectory is clear. The presidency is being redefined. and the era of unchecked executive dominance is being steadily curtailed. The political landscape has shifted. The slow, steady restoration of institutional authority is underway, and the consequences for Trump, the Republican Party, and the future of the presidency will resonate for years to come.